This video is sponsored by Surfshark. The streak continues. Wano is amazing. And on top of it having some of the best action sequences so far, it also has one of the craziest callbacks I've ever seen in a long-running anything. Which is sort of auspicious because I'm now nearing the end of this series for the time being. And to be honest, even saying that out loud is sort of surreal. 5 months ago, I hadn't read a single chapter of this superlative masterclass in shonen storytelling. And now I'm after arriving on the shores of Wano. It's been incredible, it's been long, but most importantly, so worthwhile. And what's more is, today I'll be surpassing the anime. Now, obviously there'll be no spoilers used up until I surpass the anime, and once I do, there will be a clear warning for anyone that wishes to dip out thereafter. But the very fact that I'm able to say that is nuts to me. We're finally on the home stretch, guys, and today we're diving into and dissecting the second part to this sprawling tale of Shogun, Samurai, and Smiles. I'm Totally Not Mark, and these are my first impressions of, thoughts on, and review for the tragic, the powerful, and the awesome Wano Act 2. Alrighty, so in the last episode, I explored various story structures from the modern 3-act structure all the way to the classical 5-act structure. But more specifically, the Japanese variety of that 5-act structure called Joha-kyu. In this structure, you start slowly, then gradually and smoothly accelerate towards a very fast peak. Now, I find this particularly interesting because this rhythm or flow can be seen as quite different from the Western idea of beginning, middle, and end, or acts 1, 2, and 3. Since the latter tends to produce a series of steps rather than a smooth acceleration. In addition, this concept of beginning, middle, and end usually only refers to the overall dramatic structure of a play, while Joha-kyu is used to support every moment of a performance as well as its structure. Each individual speech will have its own internal Joha-kyu. Every single gesture even employs its own little micro Joha-kyu. And that specific component to Joha-kyu is what I find to be the most interesting. Heck, the Japanese culture even employs it in martial arts, which makes it the perfect fit for a shonen story, a story about fighting. In other words, each and every one of these 5 acts will also experience their own internal Joha-kyus, with even the scenes inside it, including fight scenes, adhering to this particular structure. And in doing my research for this, that particular trait from this sort of story structure I found to be the most interesting, not only from a narrative standpoint, but from a sheer morbid curiosity one also. After looking and researching about Joha-kyu, I really wanted to see if Oda applied this sort of cohesion and commitment to the Joha-kyu practice. And while Act 1 did explore a large number of reintroductions, new characters, plot points, and all the rest of it, it seems that while he was building to these, the format of Joha-kyu was followed in smaller details and scenes dotted throughout the first act. Luffy shows up on the beach and explores. Jo. He gets into a minor conflict with creatures. Ha! And finally, he quickly dismantles the bad guys, meeting a very fast and speedy resolution. Kyu. This sort of structure to the overall flow of scenes and conversations can be observed throughout the first act, and most definitely at its climax, which not only acts as its own internal example of Jo, Ha, and Kyu, but it also acts as an example of a fast climax or representing a Kyu for the entire act as a whole and not just that one scene. I can't describe how blown my mind was retroactively by simply watching these old men describe to me what Joha-kyu was. Oda is doing the literary equivalent of 4D chess right now, and I'm actually a little intimidated as a human being. I've never seen this level of commitment to story structure, and I'm sorry if I've harped on about this for so long. I just needed to share this and to also justify to myself the ungodly amount of time I spent watching delightful men like this guy describe to me what Joha-kyu actually is, and to justify reading web pages that looked like this. With that said, after having read Act 1, while I thought it was a phenomenal outing for the series and one that has, in my opinion, set a strong standard for the rest of the subsequent acts to uphold, Act 2, being the one that I'm discussing in this video, is actually the one that I'm most excited to look at as a case study. At the beginning of my last video, I outlined what I believe to be an issue with the traditional modern 3-act structure, that being its second act running the risk of being rather vague or, at times, uninteresting. And this is where I hope Joha-kyu comes in, otherwise I'll have wasted 6 hours watching this guy talk about 18th century Japanese scripture. As I outlined in the prior video, I wanted to see if the Japanese technique could remedy the issue that plagues the modern 3-act structure. So let's see. Let's dive into Wano Act 2. Chapter 925. Diving into this story, the first pattern I've become aware of has been these small single chapter intermissions discussing the events of the outside world in some small or large way quickly before returning to the action within the closed off boundaries of Wano country. Right before Act 1 began, we got a glimpse into Cat Viper's journey to recruit Marco from Whitebeard's former crew, and it was pretty sad, with Marco himself imparting a message that is still unknown to us for to give to Luffy. However, in this intermission, we get something way more interesting. Through Hawkeye reading the newspaper like a disgruntled old man, we learn Gecko Moria is not only alive, but is marching an army of zombies on Blackbeard's crew. But that's not even the interesting part. Apparently, Absalon's clear fruit ability has been taken from him, and in addition to that, has been given to this guy. Remember him? From Impel Down? Well, he's got it. So yeah, not great. And if that wasn't enough, the revolutionaries we saw getting ready for a big mission during the Reverie have infiltrated Sacred Marijoa to get Kuma back. And get this, they are currently clashing with Fujitora and the other admiral, Ryokugyo. So it seems the world is on fire, outside of what's going on in the main plot, which, to be honest, still doesn't have the best sort of circumstances. But what makes this chapter particularly interesting to me, however, is that whenever we do peer outside of the events of this Wano tale, something even more severe has happened. And what's more is that it reinforces the idea that no information is reaching Luffy and the gang while they're in there, adding to this feeling that something massive is going to happen while they are in Wano, and once they finish their business there and connect Wano with the rest of society, they will become aware of something even more horrible or significant that requires their immediate attention thereafter. Which would be, once again, a classic case of the characters and events informing what happens next in the narrative. Their goal is to help free Wano, and in doing so will cause them to become aware of just what transpired while they were in that closed off box. It's a super interesting aspect of the story that honestly makes me excited to read the intermission between each act all the more. Chapters 926, 927, and 928. Alrighty, so now that we're getting into the material for Act 2 proper, let's pay attention to two things. This is the first ha of Johakyu, which primarily dedicated to breaks or development within the story, and it employs a slow start before quickly building to something significant and a climax that is self-contained in this Act 2. With that said, the curtain opens in Act 2, literally, immediately setting scenes for future events, or at least with some of them I think that's the case. There are instances where Otama is told that her ability is very powerful, which, I mean, it absolutely is, but I wonder how this power will come into play later in the story, if at all. Within Act 2 itself, it definitely doesn't play a super significant role therein. I mean, she's already demonstrated that she can become a master of creatures and people far more powerful than her. How far can this trail of logic follow? I have no idea, and how will it manifest? No clue. There's some terrific meat in this particular section too, with characters like Shutenmaru who've demonstrated that they have ties to the original Kozuki Samurai Guard. We're given a nuanced, jaded point of view with this character, resentful that for 20 years they were forced to wait when they needed them. And throughout this act, we explore what that actually means with his character as he introduces us to a large graveyard which to this very day haunts him. And trust me, added detail and development is something we get a lot of during this section too. In fact, there was a theory I had brewing with the character of Kiku that turned out to be horribly incorrect, that I plan on sharing with you all a little later. However, primarily the focus of these chapters centers around two different parts of the story. A prison break section, which is established with Luffy, and the second, the Straw Hat Plan, which itself is segmented between Zoro, who went missing while sitting down with everyone. This is sort of like someone getting lost while riding on a bus with you. I mean, these are advanced levels of ineptitude when it comes to staying together. I love Zoro. The rest of the Straw Hat crew, however, are still together trying to gain numbers for the revolution that will be taking place in a while. And this is where the utility of Robin's position as a geisha, I mentioned in the first video, comes to be of great benefit. She's invited to a big feast at the Shogun's palace, which is ideal for gathering intel, but is also when we first learn of the existence of a particular character called Komura Saki, someone that's supposedly the most beautiful woman in Wano. Another minor aspect of this that I liked was how these two characters, Komurasaki and Shogun, are built up. Both significant in very different ways, but I really like the Shogun specifically, with it showing interesting silhouettes depicting a bunch of dragons or snakes. It's really cool and foreboding. Now, I realize that this is coming from someone that literally just spent 8 hours researching 18th century Japanese approaches to literary narrative and artistic endeavors, and so I acknowledge that there's no amount of flowery language I can use to convince you that I'm not the most boring person alive today. But I found Luffy's predicament a really nice respite from the more complicated aspects of the story. For me, the bulk of the humor came from this specific section. It's honestly where most of the interest came for me also within this act. And that's not to say that the rest isn't massively enjoyable. It absolutely is. But I'm a big fan of these closed off small scenes, as they usually promote a lot of creativity. With this specifically demonstrating cool new dynamics between characters like Luffy and Kid plowing through all of their work while earning way more food than should be physically possible. But perhaps the best new dynamic in this act for me comes between this little old man called Hugh that's struggling greatly and Luffy who helps him get the food he needs and in some cases the protection he requires. I love this not just because it's incredibly endearing but also because it's setting the foundation for something much more significant down the line, and it's all to do with who Luffy is as a person. And speaking of a person, Raizo's a person. Raizo is there with Luffy, saying that he's in the middle of springing Luffy out of this prison. This whole plot point right here, it connects with the rest of the main story in a really significant and interesting way that I honestly didn't see coming. But I will get to that later. The remaining section of these chapters is then dedicated to the new characters of Komurasaki and Oriran that's said to be incredibly gorgeous. And she is, but what makes this person as interesting as she is comes from her implied connection to Momonosuke, his long-lost sister Hiyori, and the fact that she's made a life out of taking advantage of various people. On the funny side, however, there are various scenes within this story where I get routinely confused as to whether I'm looking at Komurasaki or Robin. Without the anime's color differences, these two characters have very little that set them apart in an obvious way. Chapters 929, 930, and 931. These chapters open up with a character called Minatomo, and my One Piece Secret Service pointed out something hilarious to me. Alright, check it out. So, remember back in Chapter 1? No? Me neither. Well, back in Chapter 1, this guy called Higume the Bear barges his way into the bar and in doing so breaks the door. However, when he leaves, as you can see, there's a continuity error when he leaves the building. The door is back in place. So, I can hear you all saying, okay, it's a continuity error from almost 1,000 chapters ago. So what, Mark? Stop wasting my time. First of all, back up, quit harshing my chill, but also, you see, at the beginning of every chapter, Oda likes to do a little question corner wherein he takes and answers questions from fans. One such question asks about this particular inconsistency in Chapter 1. Oda's response, I quote, "Oh, that's just Mr. Minatomo, the carpenter's doing." He even included a quick little illustration on the side. Now, this was obviously a throwaway joke, but does that little doodle look familiar to you? Because it should. It's the same design and same family name of the carpenter pictured in this chapter. I love stuff like this, and it goes to show what sort of crazy memory Oda has, whether it be for pivotal plot points or crazy, silly, pointless stuff like this. Contrasting that, however, with something a little more serious, as I pointed out, in the prior chapters it was teased who the Shogun of Wano was and what he looked like, and once again we get some exchange between he and an individual he executes. And this individual isn't just anyone. He shoots a member of CP0. That's right, he doesn't care that they represent the Celestial Dragon's interests or that they have the backing of the entire Navy, and that's because his confidence comes from Kaido backing him up. He fears no Celestial Dragon or naval force. He is an island into and of himself, and following this, he's finally revealed. Shogun Orochi, surrounded by wealth, women, and all the food he can eat. And the page spread that this man is revealed on is a great sequence of panels demonstrating where he is and zooms out to the wastelands of his own creation and the factories that make the land so. Now, honestly, I really enjoyed this guy as a character. His design and overall presence reminds me of King Wapol, only better in every conceivable way. In my opinion, this is King Wapol done well. He's threatening because of his allegiances, and to top it all off, has some pretty dope powers that I will be discussing in a moment. Right, so at this point, I probably should point out that this arc dedicates a lot of time to two characters specifically. Zoro, whom we all should be very familiar with at this point. If you're not, I don't know how you found this video. And the second person, this self-proclaimed sycophant called Yasu. He leads Zoro to the village of Ibisu, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't really think too much about this town or this person, or what sort of relevance it will have for the story. It's a poverty-stricken town, much like the rest of Wano, with the only difference being everyone is smiling and rejoicing all the time, regardless of their situation. For now, Zoro takes it as a philosophical outlook all these people share, but as the story progresses, the dark truth behind this village is nothing short of horrific. Okay, y'all still there? Okay, good, because this is when the story starts to ramp up in a big way. And speaking of big, Big Mom is here, and she is mad. Immediately, she tries to scale the falls of Wano with the giant koi on her ship. However, naturally, Kaido wants her to stay far away from his territory and thus deploys one of his henchmen to sort out the situation, which they do quite effectively. The curious thing about this particular exchange, however, is that had Katakuri been present on the ship, they might have been able to avoid or block the attack altogether using his future sight abilities, and perhaps might have even succeeded in scaling the falls, which is on its own a really cool detail, but also a fantastic piece of continuity following on from Whole Cake Island. Regardless, Big Mom falls into the ocean with not even her crew knowing where she went. As a devil fruit wielder, this is extremely dangerous and practical death sentence. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of stuff happens in this act. Like, I'm looking over my notes right now and there's an absurd amount of detail to cover. Like, I didn't even get a chance to touch on the little scrap the Straw Hats get into while they defend this little smiling girl called Otoko, all the while they're looking to recruit more people for the rebellion. Like, I mean, they need like 5,000 and they are nowhere near that number right now. But the cool part is that within this scrap, Sanji finally uses his Garma suit that his family gave to him. And it's pretty sick, allowing him to go unseen pretty much anywhere he wants to while also heightening all of his abilities. I'm just gonna pretend the whole spying on his fellow crewmates in a bathhouse didn't happen, you know, cause why tarnish such an amazing power-up in character with yet another crude and self-serving gag? Oh, and as I mentioned earlier, Robin's at the party looking for poneglyphs, and get this, Big Mom washes up on the beach right near Chopper, Kiku, Momo, and Otama. But, and this is the weird part, she has amnesia. What? Jokes aside though, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I mean, I accept that in order for a story to work, there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that goes into it from the audience. But within reason. I was willing to accept that in Act 1 Luffy washed up on the beach alone, and I'm also willing to accept that Big Mom did the same. Maybe there's a specific current or something, I don't know. Who's to say? But for Big Mom now to also have amnesia when she hasn't had a history of that before in the series, and it just so happens to be the only situation that could allow her to travel with the Straw Hats, it feels less like carefully planned writing and more like Oda trying to fit a triangle peg into a circular hole. At least to me. So much so that for the entire time she was with Chopper in them, I had this feeling in the back of my head that she was faking it somehow in order to keep a low profile while she was separated from her crew. But as it happens, it's real. Now, with that said, as a narrative tool, she acts as a terrific means with which to garner attention for the story. She's effectively a ticking time bomb. No one knows when she'll suddenly recall who the Straw Hats are, and when she does, it's gonna be a big deal. Chapters 932 to 937. Within these chapters, there are 3 significant plot points that really caught my attention and that I thoroughly enjoyed. The first being that of the feast held by Shogun Orochi, wherein Robin is discovered by some henchmen, and by some henchmen, I mean a whole lot of henchmen, but she uses her clone ability to escape, which always seems to catch me off guard. Because of this, eventually Nami is forced to intervene and help, but by far the most interesting part happens when the little girl, Otoko, gets on the nerves of Orochi and Komurasaki is forced to stand up for her. She even slaps him. First off, awesome. Second, awesome. And thirdly, the character Komurasaki really keeps me on my toes. In one scene, she's conning men out of their life savings, and in another, she's defending a little girl, with seemingly zero fear demonstrated super effectively on this page spread, showcasing the powers of Orochi in all of its terrifying glory. He's intimidating, but Komurasaki refuses to yield to his whims, which is freaking cool. Right after this act of defiance, however, Kyoshiro slashes down Komurasaki, and this is when Nami makes the last-minute clutch play to save the game. Drops down and unloads the full brunt of Zeus onto the palace. It's a brilliant panel with a terrific sense of scale and power. And really, this entire arc so far has been one negative thing happening after the next. All the plans seem to be falling apart or meeting dead ends. Even regarding the situation with Luffy and Hyo back at the prison, the situation worsens, particularly after Hyo begins getting punished by the wardens yet again. And in typical Luffy fashion, well, you know the rest. Once again, these are my favorite scenes in the act because they're so wholesome. Luffy shares his food tickets with the old man who's starving. The old guy gets into trouble for having them in the first place, and then Luffy defends him. It's a really simple story, but then something super interesting comes to our attention about this old guy. Apparently, he had tremendous influence over the people living in Wano years back. And the folks stuck inside this prison? Well, they were put there for crimes against the current shogun, which means all the numbers we need for the rebellion are technically right here in the prison. They don't know it yet, but they they've put the Straw Hat Captain in the exact place he needs to be to make this plan work. I mean, not that Luffy knows anything about this yet, but it's a good step forward. As I've said before, the trend of this tale is of worsening circumstances and situations. And just when you thought Luffy couldn't be in a worse predicament, they take off his cuffs and replace them with a celestial dragon collar. A collar that will slice off his head if he or Hyo leaves or gets knocked out of the sumo ring. Tension. Naturally, Luffy isn't fazed by this, and so instead of seeing this as the dire set of circumstances that it is, he instead views it as an opportunity to get stronger. He knows he can't defeat Kaido yet, so why not train, I guess? And now, finally, we get to a clear highlight of this act, and one I am sure many of you have been waiting for. That being the encounter Zoro has in the snow with an individual trying to take his weapons. First off, this section starts out with a really neat callback to Thriller Bark where Zoro dukes it out with a legend of Wano in a character called Ryuma. They clash for a while over the sword in question, but that's when we get a major convergence of two separate plot lines. Zoro and the fleeing Komurasaki and Otoko bleeding. I absolutely love this section, not really because I noticed anything particularly incredible about it narratively, but because I just love Zoro as a character and he hasn't really had his own chance to shine in this story yet, or at least not for quite some time. Too often I think he's relegated to dealing with something that Luffy doesn't have time to deal with. And he is fantastic in that role, don't get me wrong, but I love getting the chance to see him in his own little subplot that has now intertwined with the Komurasaki plot, which I have lots to talk about, by the way. To make matters worse, however, another character makes himself known, a criminal from the flower capital called Hitokiri Kamaza, who, let me tell you, apart from being hella strong, has a much more significant role to play in this tale beyond what he's shown to be right now. My personal highlight within this fight has to be the ebb and flow of Zoro's attention having to dart from one tough threat to the next, all the while trying to defend a woman and child. This act really helps me connect with and appreciate Zoro all the more, but as the fight presses on, it's looking to be that little bit too much for him. This was awesome. In the most Zoro way I can think of. I mean, we're talking about the kind of guy who was willing to cut off his legs to free himself in Little Garden. And for him to use this reckless side of his personality to gain the upper hand on this individual is a brilliant choice, I think. And that's not even to make mention of the anime's version of this scene that elevates the entire altercation to the next level with superb and dynamic animation. But with Zoro now gravely wounded and with the battle looming in the coming days, and now only having two swords, things really aren't looking good for the one-eyed swordsman. Especially now that the forces of Orochi have been catching onto the rebellion's plans and the secret messages. Everything is going wrong. I want to thank Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video. In the ocean of online content, there's a lot of websites that take your info without you even knowing it, but you can swim under their radar using Surfshark VPN. With this particular service, you can stop websites from tracking your info and selling targeted ads to you online, completely protecting your privacy. Nothing is creepier than when you have a conversation with a friend about something and it pops up in your ads. Plus, with Surfshark Hardlock ID protection, you'll even get an alert when some rando jerk is trying to break into your email. But one of my personal favorite features of Surfshark is that you can see content that's not available in your area. For instance, did you know that right now on Netflix you can have the first 130 episodes of One Piece? Well, if you live in a country where that's not available, you can just log in with Surfshark and you can get access to that or any other show or film that isn't normally available for you. So, if you want both freedom and protection online, click the link in the description and use code TNM. It not only gives you a whopping 83% off the regular price, but also 3 months of service totally for free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to even try it out for yourself. So if this service sounds interesting to you or you want to support the channel, please check it out. Now, back to the video.
None of you pirates on this ship have the proper appreciation for booty.
Chapters 938 to 945.
光月桃之助、私は妹、日和と申します。
I had this theory I was writing where I was convinced Lady Toki, Hiyori and Momonosuke's mother, was, in fact, Kiku, because of how she spoke and how different she was to all of the others in comparison. I figured that since Hiyori was thought dead too, but turned out to be alive, that Lady Toki would be alive also. But back to Komurasaki claiming to be Momo's sister, she says she wasn't allowed to go into the future with them because, and I quote, if something happened to one of us, the Kozuki blood might still live on. Now, I'm not sure I believe that to be a good excuse. I mean, they're in a burning building full of enemies. Something tells me one route is less dangerous or treacherous than the other. But then again, she did have an escape route, with Kawamatsu saving her. That also helped protect and raise her up until she was 13 years of age. He was apparently a powerful samurai, and this is the individual locked up in the cell that's never to be opened in the same place where Luffy is right now. Apparently, there are also 9 samurai that are significant, which is great seeing as so many of them seem to be coming out of the woodwork and making themselves known, but in saying that, the rebellion needs to be reworked because, as of right now, the villages and capital are crawling with folks rounding up those with the tattoo of the crescent moon, which shows support for the rebellion, and that's when this dude moseys on into town. This fellow is the very same gentleman that guided Zoro to Ibizu, and alongside the rest of the Straw Hats who don't know him also, he ruminates over what it might take to take the attention away from them once more to gain the advantage. Overall, they don't really come up with anything, but they do learn more about this fellow, how he gives everything he has to those of the village, and how he is in fact Otako's father. He works tirelessly for the benefit of his village and to look after his daughter. It's a wonderful example of how Oda likes to take certain characters that feel like comedic side notes to the main event and recontextualizes them. There's a tragic struggle behind the unrelenting smile, and in more ways than one, as we soon will find out. Back over in Udon, there's this phenomenal scene. Luffy's taking on the various guards in the area, and now, obviously, the drawback with this situation is less to do with Luffy being able to hold his own, but more so Hyo struggling. He's admitting to not wanting to hold Luffy back, and that's when Luffy uses his observation haki to guide Hyo away from the enemy's attacks by seeing into the future. It's a really unusual but awesome way to incorporate teamwork in the fight, but what's more is, noticing the power and hearing Luffy refer to it as haki, Hyo realizes that it must be the very same invisible power found in Wano, later revealed as Ryo, and vows to help teach Luffy that power by which he seeks, the ability to damage enemies without touching them. This is so wonderful for a number of reasons. Firstly, it adds a little bit of flavor to Wano in the same way that they have their own currency, but it also helps build upon this notion that Wano is very much an isolated nation from the rest of the world. But most critically, and well, it's almost the most exciting thing, Luffy now has an active mentor, which, if his last fight with Kaido was anything to go by, he is in dire need of having. What follows is Luffy making easy work of the guards as he tries his best to master his advanced haki. This is a really interesting new format for gaining abilities in One Piece. In the past, a lot of Luffy's power-ups are off-screen and explained later down the line. Oda has typically avoided the battle shonen trainee arcs that make up many other series like Dragon Ball. There are exceptions, of course, particularly around the time skip, but the battle with Katakuri really brought this idea of Luffy learning through battle and by adapting to a situation to the forefront of the narrative, and it continues right here. Hyo's literally writing Luffy while he beats up enemies like some sort of mutant Yoshi. It's amazing and easily the lighthearted highlight of the act for me. That is, until the bobble-headed ninja Raizo rolls up, masterfully cloaked under Caribou? Oh yeah! That one from the Sabaody arc with the horrifying nickname Wet-Haired Caribou that conjures up the most horrific visions of, yeah. He's back, and he's supposedly changed his ways, pulling the weirdest face in the process of revealing this, and that, of course, works on Luffy because Luffy's Luffy. What makes this scene so impactful, however, is that it enlightens Hyo to the truth that the Akazaya samurai and Momonosuke are alive. The rebellion is still alive. This is supremely important as he goes on to reveal that almost all the prisoners here in Udon are imprisoned entirely because they oppose Orochi. And if he were to reveal this to everyone, he'd effectively have an army at his disposal. Despite hearing of Hyo's past, we finally see the spark with him reignite. A hope washes over Udon. That is until... It seems we can't have too much happiness in Wano, apparently. In spite of the optimistic news in Udon, back in the capital, Orochi has apprehended elusive Ushimitsu Kozo and plans to execute him alongside Komurasaki's funeral. Unfortunately, as Brook encounters Zoro, Hiyori, and Toko, it's revealed that Kozo is none other than Honoyasu, our poor smiley do-gooder. Fearing for his father's life, Toko rushes back to the capital at blistering speed with the others in pursuit. It's a rudimentary tool, but it's a smart way of getting everyone pointed towards the same location, focusing the plot, while introducing a layer of personal tension tension. Will she make it in time? Adding to this, the execution is being broadcast across the land, and the gang who recently learnt of Yasu's history in Ebizu look on in horror. As if this wasn't shocking enough, as Konjuro and Shinobu lay eyes upon the scene, the significance of the event becomes clear. Tonoyasu is in fact Yasu the Hedgehog, the daimyo of Hakumai, and comrade of the infamous Odin. The stakes could not possibly be higher right now, and all of the solutions are either too far away, stuck simply watching, or both. The situation is quite literally helpless, and Yasu knows this, but he's prepared for it, and he delivers one of the most impactful speeches in the arc thus far. In a land where its inhabitants are so oppressed, so terrified of their rulers, Yasu is unwavering in spite of his dire situation. He not only mocks his current circumstances by admitting he's not actually Kozo, but he also addresses Orochi outright and condemns the way he ravaged such a wonderful country in Wano. Without batting an eye, he calls him nothing more than vermin. In what is the most emotionally and heroic lie yet in the series, he takes responsibility for the symbol of the uprising, claiming it to be nothing but a prank. This is absolutely genius for two reasons. Firstly, it protects the rebellion and gives them a tactical advantage once again, but secondly, it humiliates Orochi beyond comprehension, destroying his reputation in the process. As Orochi prepares to deliver the final blow, Yasu throws out one last bout of humiliation, reciting words that cut deep into Orochi's heart. A man of such small caliber shall never, in his life, truly devour Odin. Orochi's crosshairs plant themselves firmly on Yasu as he rallies the nation towards Onigashima. As a flurry of bullets pierce Yasu, Toko finally arrives on the scene, desperately calling out to her father, and what follows this is one of the most shocking moments in all of Wano. This is one of the most horrifically twisted moments in all of One Piece, and it is executed to perfection on just about every level. Structurally, this corresponds to the ha part of the Kabuki play structure, where events begin to escalate at a rapid pace. Yasu's words are, for all intents and purposes, the match that ignites the fuse of battle, and the next reveal only adds fuel to that fire. Overwhelmed by grief, Hiyori and Shinobu unveil the secret of Ibizu Town. The smiles they wear are nothing but masks, horrific contortions caused by the aptly named smile fruits. With only a 10% success rate, the failures wipe out the consumer's ability to express sorrow or anger, leaving only laughter. In yet another tragic twist, it's revealed Orochi shipped the defective fruits to the starving Ibisu Town residents for no other reason but psychotic satisfaction. Now, obviously cruelty is nothing new for One Piece, but this takes the cake for arguably the most disturbing revelation of the series so far. The idea of never being able to express grief is horrifying. The idea of being trapped behind a false smile of course resonates with so many people. It's akin to the Joker's laughing gas in the Batman franchise. It's nothing but unrelenting psychopathy. Orochi is perhaps the most vindictive character in all of One Piece. What an absolute monster. So far I've held myself together fairly well, but Otoko broke me, took my heart and crushed it. As she lays over her fallen father, fighting back tears and laughter, she begs him to come back to life, pulling out medicine, toad oil, she says, promising it will cure him. Oda, you sick and twisted master of tragedy. To have planted what seemed like a throwaway gag for Usopp at the start of this arc, only to bring it back around as a vessel to torture your reader, and even torture Usopp, a character who had to watch his own mother pass away from illness. It's on another level of total and utter cruel genius. I normally read through these chapters in bulk, writing my notes as I go, but when I came to this scene, this small exchange, I fell apart and, needless to say, had to step away for a few minutes. But thankfully, upon my return, Oda was right there for me with comforting arms. As Orochi takes notice of Otoko, he fires at her, and in what is one of the coolest reunions to date, it's Zoro and Sanji to the rescue. For the first time since Dressrosa, the boys are back together, and holy crap, is it awesome. Needless to say, I almost definitely squealed with excitement over that moment. What follows this is a chaotic, impromptu scramble by all the Straw Hats present, trying to save Toko and to retrieve her now deceased father, in order to give him the proper burial that he deserves. There's some great action here, with Usopp getting stuck in with his slingshot, and even Zoro using everything in his power right now to take out the cruel tyrant in Orochi. However, his two-sword attack gets blocked by Kyoshiro. This character is creepy as all hell and is ridiculously dedicated to Orochi's protection. Thankfully, however, they manage to escape, but just as things are wrapping up here, Luffy is dealing with his own situation. Someone is knocking on the door of the Udon prison camp. So, this is the wildcard element I was talking about regarding Big Mom in this story. As mentioned before, Luffy can't leave this circle without his collar yeeting his head right off. And now Big Mom is demolishing the area. But diamonds are made under extreme pressure, and it doesn't get any more pressurized than this. As Luffy and Hyo are sent flying from the arena floor and outside of the perimeter, Luffy suddenly becomes infused with outward haki. Obviously, this is super cool, but it also begs the question from me. We've now seen advanced forms of armament haki and observation haki, so I wonder what advanced Supreme King haki looks like. And with very few people even possessing the power itself, finding a master might be harder than you might think. However, as demonstrated with Hyo and Katakuri, Luffy can learn under extreme pressure and while facing an adversary. So my prediction, this advanced Supreme King haki will be taught to him by red-haired Shanks when he ultimately has to face off against him. Now, if you thought this scene was over, you're sorely mistaken. As it happens, the warden managed to inadvertently restore Big Mom's memory by bonking her super hard in the head, and once he has her down, he chains her up to the gills in Sea Prism Stone. It's honestly hilarious the precautions these folks are taking in apprehending an Emperor of the Sea. These Emperors really are a force of nature. In the ensuing chaos caused by Big Mom, Kawamatsu is freed from his cell, just in time to see rounds of plague fired onto the prison population to contain the riots. The imagery is honestly pretty horrific. This population of people in this prison largely are there simply because they disagree with the psychotic direction this tyrannical shogun has forced their once great country to go down. One that, as it happens, has led Kid's crewmate to suffer the same fate as those from Ibizu village. On top of this, also working as a great swerve, associating this killer with the same person that ambushed Zoro in the snow, it also explains why Kid hates Kaido so much, and why he vowed to be the one to take him out when he was face to face with Luffy earlier. However, nothing can be done if everyone is resigned to dying from this plague, and that's when Luffy steps in. Luffy is a bona fide, and in the truest sense of the term, a natural-born leader. He does not see himself as more or less worthy than anybody, and standing in direct contrast with Shogun Orochi, decides to lead by example, inflicting himself with the plague to rile up the prisoners and to lift their spirits. I love this speech for so many reasons, but more than anything, it once again granted Oda the opportunity to demonstrate exactly what it is about Luffy that we love and respect as a character. This scene also boasts the most badass Luffy line in the series. Check it out. Luffy stops this Elephant Man's trunk from firing another one of these rounds, and before it goes off, he ties it into the trunk, and calmly states, "I saw a pretty bad future just now." That's just cold-blooded awesome and intimidating as all hell right there. Thankfully though, Chopper and the rest of those traveling with Big Mom at the time are there too to provide backup for Luffy, who's losing his strength fast. However, quite auspiciously, Momo is seen by everyone in the facility, bringing forth new vigor onto the ranks of the prison. They have now something to fight for. The rest of the subsequent arc is comprised of various events that count down the days until the rebellion. In them we get some outstandingly entertaining scenes like the tense conversations between Big Mom and Kaido, wherein they form an alliance, with some truly crazy imagery like these shadowy giant creatures referred to simply as numbers. I'm not sure who or what they are, but I know that they are there for the Fire Festival, whatever that means. There's also some truly interesting scenes between Law and Hawkins, who finds himself at the wrong end of Law's sword. Hawkins reveals why he no longer has an alliance with Kid, citing that joining Kaido was his only option. I see this as Law looking into the mirror. Something Law seems to be having trouble with in this arc itself specifically is coming to terms with the fact Luffy and Kaido are going to fight, and he needs to choose which side he's going to be on. The Straw Hats and he have already clashed, calling his crew's abilities into question, and that's not even to make mention of how stressed out he gets around Luffy. Right now, Law strikes me as a sort of wild card, though I doubt very much he'll betray Luffy when all the cards are down. But you never know. At the very end of chapter 955, the worst happens. Orochi receives leaked and updated information regarding the rebellion and where it's going to be starting. It's insinuated through paneling that Law was the one who leaked that to the Shogun, but that seems misleading to me. It's too obvious. In my mind, I think two people are the two most likely traitors amidst this group: Kiku and Komurasaki. Komurasaki, for reasons I stated prior, her introductory scenes demonstrated a much more unkind woman that would do anything to get what she wanted. With that said though, while Momo wouldn't recognize her, she has demonstrated knowledge of her own family's sword and the fact that Kawamatsu vouches for her. Then again, she hadn't seen him in about 13 years, and a lot of changes could have come about in that time, but yeah, I'm not too sure on her personally, or even Kiku for that matter. The only aspect that makes me wary of her is that Zoro had his suspicions about her, and he usually is a great judge of character. These are both probably wildly incorrect, but this is what my gut is telling me right now. Much of the prelude to this ending focuses on the successful recruitment of various rebel forces to bolster their ranks, as well as training for Luffy and ironing out the plan of attack. We get some nice backstories on the individuals that took Zoro's sword, and the location of a hideout that contains the weaponry that will be used during this revolution. This weaponry was guarded by this fox spirit, and the imagery of this fox is honestly gorgeous and matches Japanese symbolism of foxes perfectly. In Japan, they are seen as guardians to many shrines across the country. But perhaps most importantly, Zoro comes to obtain a new sword, and not just any sword. This is the sword owned by Oden himself and is given to him by Hiyori. Zoro attempts to use the sword, and in doing so almost loses his entire arm. This is a ludicrously powerful sword, and one Zoro is keen to master because, for Kaido, the only wound he's ever received has been from this blade, and thus closes the curtain on Act 2. What a phenomenal development of all the events established in the first act. There was plenty of action, but the sorrow of some of these events during this act has to be up there as some of the most harrowing in the series. Next week will be my final series review for One Piece until Act 3 concludes, and after that I'll be tackling a bunch of the movies across various videos. Also, I plan on commencing a brand new review series pretty soon. I've asked on Twitter and a poll on YouTube which ones you guys think I should tackle, and you all seem to be split down the middle on Hunter x Hunter and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, so let me know what your suggestions are in the comment section down below. Maybe you'll influence the next series. I also need to review the Moro arc of Dragon Ball Super pretty soon too, so look forward to that. However, for those of you that want to see the missing One Piece episodes that Toei have taken down from YouTube, they are available on my Patreon. These include the Marineford, Dressrosa, and Part 1 reviews. But that'll do it for this video. As always, I've been Totally Not Mark. I'll see you all next week, and thank you all so much for sharing this year with me and your amazing support on Patreon. It genuinely means the world to me.